And we see that Putin himself described that Yeltsin was insisting him to be a candidate to become a president for Russia. What he saw in Putin, do you think he was seeing something in Putin, some potential in him that he was willing to Putin become the president of Russia?
Boris Yeltsin was one of the most corrupt individuals ever to sit in a position of power in Russia. He was corrupt to the bone. He was a drunk. He was a thief. He took bribes. He allowed bribes. He basically oversaw a system of government that was about schemes and planning and plotting to make money quickly. Robber capitalism of the utmost degree. And when you surround yourself with people like that, who can you rely on? I mean, I think at some point in time, even Boris Yeltsin realized this is broken. This is badly broken. Russia's in deep trouble. But who does he turn to? The people who have been stealing Russia blind for the past 7 years? Does he turn to the thief and say, secure the bank? No. There was one man in that group who was incorruptible. One man with a reputation of integrity. One man who got the job done without asking for a bribe. His name was Vladimir Putin. And, I'm not here pretending that Vladimir Putin's God's gift to the world. I don't know him. I have read a lot of allegations that have been leveled against him, calling him corrupt, et cetera. But every time you pursue that, you don't find any evidence. In fact, you find the exact opposite. People who have met him during this time period talk about how honest he was, how hardworking he was, how sincere he was. Again, I'm not saying he's perfect. Nobody is. But when you're surrounded in a sea of corruption, this man, Vladimir Putin, who otherwise might have been seen as mediocre or, nothing remarkable about him. But when you're surrounded with corruption, suddenly he shines like a beacon. And Yeltsin turned to him, not only to save Yeltsin, because remember, Yeltsin knew that if he resigned the presidency, he would probably be arrested and charged with serious crimes because he was corrupt and his family was corrupt. So that he made a deal. I will make you president, but you don't arrest me. And according to the lore, Putin turned it down and said, I'm not ready for this. This is not what I should be. I shouldn't be president. And Yeltsin came back to him and said, no, this is what I want. And Putin said, okay. And Putin kept his word. Yeltsin wasn't arrested. Yeltsin wasn't prosecuted, but the system of corruption came to an end. Now, you can't end corruption instantly. When the entire system is corrupt and you step in, you can't just turn around and fire everybody? What you can do is lead by example to begin to appoint honest people. Now, everybody talks about the Silovki, the men of power that Putin put around him. Well, who is Putin supposed to turn to in the early days? Russian businessmen? Michael Khodorkovsky, one of the most corrupt individuals ever, a man who robbed pensioners blind to get control of Lukos. I could go on and on and on. Every single one of these, oligarchs, thieves. Oh, murderous thieves in some ways. So Putin turned to people he trusted. Who did he trust? Well, I have to tell you that if I ever was put in a situation like that, I'd rely on people I met in my career who were honest, who had integrity, who I could personally vouch for. Many of them would be military officers who I met in my military career. Putin brought in intelligence officers, brought in people that he knew from his intelligence past, because he had to bring in people he could trust. And he did so. Is this perfect? No. Is it ideal? No. Is it reality? Yes. And then he worked hard to try and bring down corruption. I mean, I've got Khodorkovsky's book here someplace, but Khodorkovsky complains that Putin ran him out of Russia. Putin told him to stay the hell out of politics. He said, don't get involved in politics. And Khodorkovsky, of course, said, who are you to tell me what I can do? This is democracy. Well, it ain't democracy, Khodorkovsky. Nobody elected you. You stole all your money. You robbed people to gain control of Lukos. You're not an honest businessman. You're a corrupt oligarch, and you have no role to play in politics. Had you not stolen this money, no one would know your name. So stop pretending that you're some power broker. But he was under Yeltsin. See, under Yeltsin, he could take that money and leverage it. He could buy people. And he was used to buying people, controlling things. Putin comes in and says, no more. And when Khodorkovsky objected, Putin arrested him. Of course, Khodorkovsky cries, he stole my money. He stole Lukos. No, you stole Lukos. Putin told you to stay out of politics. You decided to get involved in politics. Now you're in jail. Tough noogies. And Putin used that as an example against the others. And he started to try and bring the corruption under control. You can't bring it under total control. So when he told the men who earned their billions by stealing the Russians, he said, continue to do business, but no more stealing from the Russian people. Now you serve the state. You can have your billions. You can have your villas, you can have your yachts, but now you serve the state. And he continued to operate that way, holding them to account. There's a famous video where he goes and he's meeting with representatives, and I forget there was one oligarch who hadn't signed a declaration. He called him up in front of everybody, threw a pen at him, said, sign the document. And the guy signed the document, and then he started to walk away. He said, give me back my pen. And he took his pen back. Putin doesn't play around. But that's what Putin was. He was selected out of nowhere. He was the accidental president. But in many ways, he was the best thing that could ever have happened to Russia. Because I think most analysts believe that had Yeltsin or a Yeltsin-like person continued to govern Russia for 2 or 3 more years, Russia would have collapsed and broken up into its constituent parts. The Far East would have separated and used the oil and gas from Sakhalin Island to make themselves rich and independent of this corrupt, festering swamp. It would have broken up into various feudal kingdoms built around various industrial enterprises. Chechnya would have become independent. The Caucasus would have broken up and become balkanized. Who knows what would have happened in the north. But Russia would have ceased to exist, which is exactly what the West wanted. You see, if that happens, then Russia will be forever weak. And Putin saw through that. That's why his April 2005 speech to the Federal Assembly is so important. The one where he said the greatest calamity of the past century was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Of course, he didn't say the greatest. He said one of the calamities, meaning there were several. But this was one. And the reason why it resonated is because overnight, millions, tens of millions of Russians became homeless. See, Putin cares about the Russian nation, the Russian people. And that's what makes him such a threat to the West, because he's taking Russia in the exact opposite direction that the West wanted Russia to go. And anyways, I think I answered your question. I might have gone off on a tangent.
Yeah. We can call Putin the architect of today's Russia, what we know as Russia today?
100%. Russia today is Russia. I mean, first of all, it's like saying that I'm the architect of the Grand Canyon. God made the Grand Canyon. I'm not the architect of the Grand Canyon. But I can pave roads that bring people to the Grand Canyon. I can put in place laws that keep pollution out of the Grand Canyon. I can monitor the ecological health of the Grand Canyon by controlling the flow of water through it. There's things I can do to enhance the Grand Canyon. Russia was produced by God, or whatever, a higher power, or Big Bang, whatever you want to say. Putin didn't make Russia. Putin didn't make Russian history. He didn't make Russian culture. He didn't invent the Russian language. He damn sure didn't invent the Russian church, the Orthodox Church. He inherited all of this. But what he inherited was a mess, an absolute mess. What Putin did is take this wonder called Russia that had been allowed to become overgrown and fragile, and he cleaned it up. He cleaned it up in his vision, the way he. But remember, he was a leader, but Russia is governed by thousands of people, not just one man. So, Putin has to talk to people, listen to people, inspire people, direct people. But at the local level, then other people have to have a vision. Vladimir Putin doesn't sit in his presidency, I believe, and say, what color should I paint the park bench on the promenade in Vodkinsk along the Vodkinsk Prud? Should it be green or should it be blue? He doesn't. That's a decision made by local authorities but what Putin does is instill pride, instill a sense of belonging. Instead of people being embarrassed by being Russian, fleeing or drinking themselves to death, you saw the life expectancy of a Russian male drop to 57 years old. I'd have been dead for 4 years now if I were a Russian male, according to that. 57, you're young at 57, but they're dying. That was the average life expectancy, which means many people were dying before that, earlier than that. Why? Because people lost hope. People lost faith. They lost a reason to live. And Putin changed that. He inspired people. He gave them hope. He gave them faith. Some people don't buy into Putin's vision. And that's okay. One of the reasons why I believe I'm comfortable saying that Russia's a democracy is that Putin's comfortable in living in a country where fully 30% of the people don't support him. Actually, he's comfortable living in a country where 49% of the people don't support him. As long as he got that 51%, he can stay in power. But, he understands that there are people out there who have a different vision. And for the most part, he respects that. And he'll engage with them and work with them and respect their opinion and try and reach a compromise. I think where he draws a line is when these people who are opposed to him are motivated by something other than the best interests of Russia. For instance, if you're an NGO and you're taking money from the British or Americans to destabilize Putin, in the name of democracy, but in reality, using the concept of democracy to destabilize Putin for the purpose of getting rid of Putin, then I think any Russian leader would say, that's illegitimate. We oppose that. We will suppress that. There's a lot of that going on. It's still going on still. Someday I'd love to get Michael McFaul and inject him with some truth serum, find out what was really going on in the U.S. Embassy while he was ambassador, because I'm pretty sure it wasn't all kumbaya moments that he tries to portray. He oversaw one of the largest CIA clandestine political action operations in modern history. The effort to undermine and remove Vladimir Putin from office. Michael McFaul was the ambassador. The ambassador is responsible for everything that happens in his embassy, and the CIA was carrying out this operation together with MI6. So, that's why I think, people who criticize the development of Russian democracy are a little off base, because Russian democracy hasn't been really given a chance to grow and succeed. It's been undermined not by Vladimir Putin, but by Western powers who continue to try and bring Russia down to the level they're comfortable with. Russia, the way it's currently configured, ain't nobody in the West happy with this. They are unhappy because it's a strong Russia, and a strong Russia is inconvenient to the global hegemony ambitions of the United States.
And so we can say what happened to Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union during Yeltsin and after Putin presidency, when he started taking power till the 2022, this year we are living in. All this history behind, we can see how his vision come from, because his speech at the ceremony of annexation, he was talking at the end of his speech. He was quoting a philosopher, a Russian philosopher, Ivan Ilyin, quoting him, "I consider Russia my motherland. That means I love as a Russian, contemplate, think, sing, speak as a Russian. Its destiny is my destiny. Its suffering my grief. Its prosperity is my joy." it's it's all about nationalism. It's all about nationalism.
Mhm.
In each and every word of this text comes nationalism, nationalism, nationalism. So why he reached this conclusion in
Well,
2022?
I think we can safely say that when Putin came into power in 1999, I don't believe he held extreme nationalist points of view. I think he was a proud Russian leader, but I think he maybe shared more of a Peter the Great's vision of a gateway to the West, working with the West, bringing in Western ideas and strengthening Russia by cooperating with the West, not in the Yeltsin corrupt manner, but in a new manner where the rule of law means something. Western companies will be brought in, but they'll behave. They won't seek to exploit. And if you start with that, and then you see where we finish with him giving an extremely nationalistic presentation, you have to ask yourself, how did that come about? And you can measure it by the speeches that Putin gives. I mean, it's a book. Somebody needs to write. Maybe I'll write it. I don't know. I think a Russian should write it. But basically putting Putin's speeches in historical context, because he's given some speeches in his career that are just masterpieces of political rhetoric. And they are speeches of immense import for not just Russia, but for the world. I already mentioned the one address that he gave to the Federal Assembly in April of 2005. Already there, you see the frustration that Russia has been abandoned. I mean, because that's pretty much what he's saying, that Russians have been abandoned and they're left to their own devices, and the West isn't helping us. The West is exploiting us. So right there, you see that, simply 6 years after becoming president, Putin's already feeling betrayed by the West and realizing that Russia needs to stand on its own, that no one's going to help it. It has to do it itself. Then you take a look at his presentation at the Munich Security Conference in 2007. That's a fundamental divorce from the West. Up until that time, the West had been laboring under the pretense that that Putin would fold eventually, get soft, become more Yeltsin-like, wouldn't be able to stand up to the West in a concerted fashion. The Munich Security Conference presentation was the exact opposite. It was Russia calling out the West for what they were. These warmongers, these people who violated international law, who did whatever they want to do. Do you not know what you have done? What he said about Iraq. And there you see him setting Russia apart, like a divorce. And then, then we take a look at the period of the reset. When because Putin had to step aside and swap out with Dmitry Medvedev in 2008, I believe, because he only could get 2 terms as president consecutive by the Constitution. And from 2008 until 2012, we see the United States trying to isolate Putin, remove Putin, eliminate Putin, not physically, but politically, by this policy of a Russian reset, basically bribing Dmitry Medvedev with massive amounts of American assistance, and we'll do everything we can to help you as long as you keep that man, Vladimir Putin, out of office. We want him gone. I mean, so much so that Joe Biden flew to Moscow in March of 2011 and gave a presentation to the opposition where he said, it's bad for Russia if Putin decides to run again for president, it's bad for Putin and bad for Russia. Imagine a Russian politician flying to the United States giving that speech. If Joe Biden decides to run for re-election, it'll be bad for Joe Biden and bad for America. Everybody said, what the hell are you doing? You're threatening us? Well, Putin ran for re-election and he won. And in 2012, basically the United States began a concerted effort to undermine him. It led to 2014 Maidan, the decision to try and take Ukraine away, sanctioning, isolation, etc. So when you have all this, Newton's, I think, third law, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. it has a corollary in just about everything. Human emotions, politics. If I'm mean to you, you're going to be mean to me. If I'm nice to you, you should be nice to me. I mean, you know, it's that way. Putin is in an environment where the United States and Europe has basically declared war on him, unofficially. They want him removed from power. They're doing whatever they can to weaken and isolate and harm Russia. There's no more pretense about helping Russia. It's all about isolating Russia. NATO is building up against Russia. Poland and the Baltics are speaking out against Russia. Everything Russia does is bad and opposed. So what is Putin supposed to do? What does he fall back on? He falls back on Russia, on Mother Russia, on Russian nationalism. And the ultimate manifestation of this was his decision in February 24th to carry out the special military operation. The special military operation resulted in 4 new provinces being absorbed by Russia. Mother Russia grew, and Putin gave a speech worthy of that moment. Now, if you're a Russian, you should have pride. If you're in the West, you know, maybe you're angry by it, but it doesn't matter because Putin wasn't speaking to the West. He wasn't talking to the West. He was talking to the Russian people. And I believe, just like their president, many Russians are becoming nationalistic. Russians are growing up to understand and have pride in their country. You know, there was a time where Russians had a sort of a stigma, where like an inherent inferiority complex, where they were proud to be Russian, but, you know, Europe and America, they sure have nice stuff. Now the Americans, yeah, they're pretty smart. They're pretty powerful. The Europeans, they're wealthy and all that. And so the Russians always had this little inferiority complex. And I think Russians now are waking up saying, the hell with them. We got Russia. I mean, for everything you got there, we got it. Moscow, from all what I hear, is a wonderful city. Modern. St. Petersburg, you can't beat it for the culture. You can pick any Russian city today, and it's a city that is modern. People have a relatively high standard of living. The infrastructure in Russia is getting better. There's not one metric that you can apply that shows that Russia today is worse off than it was when Vladimir Putin took office. You know, in the United States, we have a saying that, you know, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And we always say that about a president, or, you know, why would we vote for this guy? Are we better off today than we were 4 years ago? And if the answer is no, then we need to get somebody new in. Here's a question to any Russian. Are you better off today than you were in 1999? And you can't find a single Russian that says no. Because 1999 sucked. Everybody admits it. There's the question you have to ask. Are you better off today than you were in 1999? And the answer is no. And even if you were born in between, because I know we're getting a long time ago now, but, you know, what is that, 23 years? When was Russia better than it is today? When was Russia better than it is today? I know Russia's at war. I know the sanctions have hit, but Russians need to ask themselves, you know, from what I've seen, Russians go on vacation. What starving nation goes on vacation? What people of a nation that is incapable of supporting itself go on vacations? The Russians go on vacations. They enjoy life. They have a high standard of living, a higher standard of living. How many Russians actually go to bed hungry at night? How many Russians are homeless? How many Russians are unemployed? And you just have to look at all these metrics and say, life ain't too bad. Now, if you want to say democracy, well, ask yourself why there isn't a vibrant democracy. Is it Vladimir Putin's fault, or is it the West's fault? Because if you for a second think that the West didn't come in and corrupt every non-governmental organization out there with Western money with strings attached, bringing people out, training them specifically, and it's not just me making this stuff out of thin air. People tend to forget that there was a spyrock in Moscow back in like 2005, 2006, around that time period. I could be off by a couple of years. Spyrock. What is a spyrock? Well, it's a device that looks like a rock. And British intelligence agents were seen going by on their little device, and they were sending signals to the rock and transferring money, sending instructions to whom? NGOs who would go by the rock and get their instructions sent to them. Why would British intelligence need to use a rock to communicate with the NGOs? Because they're plotting. Guess who got control of the rock and all the contents of the rock? The Russians. They know everything. They know the truth about the corruption of the NGOs. They know about the money. They know about the instructions. Now, in a true dictatorship, these people would have been arrested, put up against the wall, and shot. All Russia did is shut down the NGOs. They arrested some people, charged them with embezzlement and corruption. Nobody was hung. Nobody was shot. I can't say that, we wouldn't have hung or shot people here in the United States, but if we had caught somebody receiving instruction from the Russian intelligence service about undermining the Democratic Party or Republican Party, they'd be in jail for a very long time.
Actually, we saw what happened to Trump. He did nothing, but he was 4 years struggling with mainstream media for what he had. He didn't do. He has done nothing, but we saw it from outside what was happening to Trump.
He had the audacity to say, why can't we be friends with Russia? You're not allowed to say that. To have the President of the United States say, why can't we be friends with Russia? Ronald Reagan got away with it because he was Ronald Reagan. Donald Trump wasn't Ronald Reagan. Donald Trump didn't have the support of the Republican Party. Ronald Reagan didn't have the support of Congress. The deep state is more deeply entrenched today than it was under Ronald Reagan. So when Donald Trump said, why can't we be friends with Russia? What did the Democrats do? Invent a dossier, invent a hacking story, invent a Russia spying story. And that haunted Donald Trump for 4 years. Even to this day, when everybody knows the truth, we know who Christopher Steele was. We know, Robbie Mook made up the hack. We know CrowdStrike is a corrupt, organization that worked with the FBI to fabricate evidence of a hack. We know that Brennan, the CIA director, deliberately released information that he knew to be false to the president to shape a narrative that Donald Trump was under the control of the Russians. Trump wasn't under the control of the Russians. I'm not going to sit here and sing Donald Trump's praises. He's an adult. He has to be held accountable for his actions. Some of his actions are abhorrent. Some of his actions are commendable. I think that he deserved at least consideration for the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to denuclearize North Korea. I mean, look where we are today with Joe Biden's leadership. North Korea has announced a formal nuclear program with formal nuclear doctrine with ICBMs that threaten American cities. Really? When we could have gotten rid of them? When Donald Trump actually was ready to cut a deal to get rid of them? But because we're not allowed to negotiate with Kim Jong-un, because this was going to be disruptive of our treaty relationship with South Korea and Japan, which we need to contain China. We can't solve the problem of North Korea because that doesn't allow us then to focus on containing China. No, he was undermined, sabotaged by his own Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and his National Security Advisor, John Bolton, stabbed him in the back. Same thing with Russia. He was never allowed to get a Russian policy implemented that would lead us down the road of friendship. He made lots of phone calls with Putin, and he had his people he trusted reach out. But as a government, as a country, he was not allowed to do that. He was attacked every time. And yeah, you're right. Look what happened to him. So here we are today, and anybody who dares speak out about the potential of friendship between the United States and Russia, is criticized, called a information terrorist or a Russian propagandist or worse. It's a bad situation.